Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this Infoshare. The Infoshare is prepared by a subtask of Work Package 6, Task 1, which worked in the last years about data plane programming and in-band network telemetry. This Infoshare focuses mostly on the measurements done and discusses the usefulness and the possible use of in-band telemetry and data plane programming in general, and the complexity of using for our current networking. These are the group of people from 4 different countries. Just a short reminder of what is in-band network telemetry. In-band network telemetry is from the telemetry phase, of which you probably most of you are familiar with streaming telemetry, a way from the router and the switches to send information to a collector. In-band telemetry instead is a different type of telemetry in the sense that it is capable of modifying user packet flowing from the switches and adding per switch specific information. The in-band telemetry then requires an ASIC, essentially a specific silicon that is capable of modifying the structure of the packet, the data structure, adds, deletes, or forwards a set of information that is transported along the path of the packets until an end in which is the extra information is subtracted and the packet is forwarded to its final destination. So there are essentially 3 roles in INT. One is the INT source, the first switch that adds and modifies the packet according to the wishes of the end user or manager or the network. There is an in transit in which a switch that receives a packet already enriched by some INT information can add further more information, and a sink that just removes from the packet all the information which has been collected along the path. What is important to understand is that as a difference from other type of monitoring, you can really modify every part of the packet because usually the ASICs and the capabilities that you have in this new type of silicon and language, I will show you the P4 language, will permit you to manipulate the packets according to your needs. So in this sense, in-band telemetry is a function or an example of what can be done with data plane programming. Data plane programming means modifying the packet without really being obliged to follow the usual frame format or header format, but you can really manipulate and exchange either format or just analyze each bit or each part of the packet and start accumulating some information for further analysis. As an example, we did in the first years denial of service analysis and prediction and mitigation according to the analysis done with these kind of technologies that are now appearing in almost every switch on the market. So what means data plane programming? Then I will revert back to INT. Essentially, you can alter the structure of each packet, and you can even apply non-switching logic to packets. That means, for example, if you recognize that there is a denial of service attacks happening, then you can delete the packet in the data plane itself without reverting to higher levels. You can personalize the monitoring. If, as an example, INT can be used to trace each switch through which the packet has been forwarded and check that this is the correct path. That information through INT itself and that means through the packets themselves, will be possibly feed to the control plane for decision of rerouting or others. Monitoring is an obvious application of these functions of int, and allows very precise monitoring. Why I say very precise? Because in principle, you can monitor every packet in a specific flow or a set of packets according to a set of rules you design. That means that you can, in principle, monitor each packet, which is obviously not very easy or due to the scaling possibilities. But if you do some in the data plane analysis, then you can really exploit monitoring capabilities which are not available in standard production routers or switches. So we decided to start this investigation of the capabilities of the new silicon and the new programming applications. We decided to follow and use the P4, which is a high-level, quote-unquote, language that allows you to program the ASICs at the low level. I was just looking at the chat. P4, Programming Protocol Independent Packet Processors, has been proposed together with the barefoot switch as an easy way to program at the data level. And we are using the P4 language to program low-level the switch using a high-level language anyway. If you want to really exploit these capabilities, then new silicon is actually added. We will see later what new silicon means. So what we did a few years ago, we started with creating a testbed. The testbed, we decided to act not in a lab, because we already had some experience in a lab, but we decided to act on a live network. So we disguise us ourselves as end users, and in each end site in these countries, GRNET, UVA in Netherlands, PSNC in Poland, and NTUA, which is National Technical University of Athens in Greece, FBK, which is a research center in Italy, and CESNET in the Czech Republic. We created some local point of presence of a distributed testbed without the need of modifying the core backbones. The idea is to validate which is the transport quality of the backbone networks acting as an end users with simple flows. So 4 switch platforms, because we wanted to understand the different capabilities of the platforms, 2 software, 2 hardware. UDP packets, because these are very simple. We will detail later what is the choice of the measurements we have just done. And we will collect these in packets in 1 or more locations for further analysis. We decided to have a minimum number of added information for each packet. And the minimum number, in any case, are timestamps when a packet transits a certain switch, and sequence number, so that we can understand if packets are lost or if they are renumbered, and we understand exactly what the packet implies in its flight from Italy to Czech Republic, as an example. So why we are doing these measurements? We want to understand what it means measuring a network at the microsecond level. We all know that we can use SNMP, but mostly streaming telemetry at the second level without too many complexity except the amount of data that you actually generate from each router and the use of the router itself. But if you go below in terms of precisions, we wanted to understand what it really means and how our network behaves at the microsecond level. How can we measure that? We decided to tag then each packet of a specific flow, one flow, end to end, with the information I just quoted, timestamps and the sequence number of the packets and the switches traversed by the packet itself, and using a simple end-to-end UDP flow. We didn't want to have a complex TCP flow, and we want to have a simple UDP flow because it's also much easier to understand if there are any effect of the NRENs network on UDP flows. What to measure at this point? We wanted to measure the interpacket gap variation. When you send, we decided to have a flow with a certain capacity, fixed capacity, 10 or 100 meg or even higher, at a constant rate. So in principle, each packet should have exactly the same space in time from the packet in front and from the packet that will follow. This is interpacket gap. If you produce correctly the interpacket, the packet flow, the interpacket gap should stay exactly the same, and any effect on the interpacket gap distribution or changes will be probably due to the network or the local environment, and you have to understand that. We wanted to check the quality of our networking in terms of packet losses and reordering, and we also wanted to understand, as another measure, in addition to interpacket gap variation, what is the packet delay variation, which can be computed if you don't have precise timestamping in terms of solar timestamping or effective timestamping of the time of the day. You can, in any case, see how the packet delay varies in a certain type of measurement. So this is what we wanted to do. Just to a brief recap, you have a packet, usual packet about Ethernet, IP, UDP. Then you add the int information about, let's say, 40 bytes. And then you have user data, which is empty, but it can be just padded by 20 or 1,000 bytes. We will see, just to try different sizes of the packets. We followed the int standard 1.0, and we extended the int standard with larger timestamps so that we can have a compatible timestamp between the different platforms and sequence numbers. These are the quantities that then we added in the packet between the UDP header and the user data, so that we essentially add these guys, add these guys in the packet itself, and the usual routers or switches will not notice that something has been added because checksums are recomputed. So everything will look like a normal UDP or packet, and the normal switches will just forward to its final destination, the UDP packet. We tested between A and B, two sites, two countries, if you want to, a single UDP flow, and the packets are generated either by iPerf, which is a usual tool, or iPerf 3, but we choose iPerf 2, or a packet generator to have a more precise timing. And we will see what happens. We will decide to have a single sync in CESNET with an FPGA of a large amount of VRAM, of memory, so that we can avoid any further modification of the packet after it has been received by sync. So we wanted as clean as possible understanding of the end-to-end timing performance of the network. This is just a recap. What I'm saying is that a new type of silicon will be available, or is already available. Now, Barefoot has been acquired by Intel, so it is distributed by Intel, but even in Juniper or other type of switches, these capabilities of modifying the structure of the packet at the bit level is available. Maybe the API is not available to the end users. How it's done? Usually these chips have a programmable parser in terms that it passes the packet, then it applies a certain match and action set of rules, and then it recreates or modifies the packet, and then it sets the packet back to this original path to the destination. This is the core part of the chip. And this is what the Tofino-based edge core, which we are using, contains. And it can be done also by the FPGA itself, because that match action rules is perfect for an FPGA. It can be done by software platforms, and we decided to investigate two platforms. BMV2, it's a virtual P4 platform, so you create a virtual switch, and you can create DPDK implementation, in which the DPDK is a, if you want, an unanswered kernel in the Linux machines that permits very fast network processing of packets. Forgive me for being very simple in this description. And we'd added to the DPK a compiler to understand a P4 program. So the measurements have been done between these four sites. One was UVA in Netherlands, in which we have a Tofino-based wedge that can act both as a normal switch, which receives packet from ePerf2, or it can generate packet himself at a very high precision. We will detail that later. And though all these packets from UVA, Italy, and Greece are sent to the sync node, the FPGA sync node in CESNET. Why this? Because it was to avoid any specific further modification in the hardware we have, and also in the path we have. We also took care that there are no bottlenecks. So we start at a minimum of 1 gig in each site, and we ramp up to 10 gig in, for example, Netherlands, UVA. The core backbones are at 100 gig, so the packets are transported at different speed in different parts of the networks. And then the final destination is at 10 gig, ensuring that we don't have any bottleneck effect. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have any question. So the methodology we used is that a UDP flow, we tested 2 capacities from each side to start with, 10 meg and 100 meg. These capacities are just to understand if low speed or medium high speed has any difference between them. In Italy, the sites, and in Greece are connected at 1 or just multiple 10 gigabit. So it's best not to use a lot of capacity and to disturb other users. We didn't want to use as DDoS emulators. But we wanted to check these 2 capacities with a minimum flow length of 120 seconds, so 2 minutes essentially, to avoid any start and close effect. And for each capacity, we tested 2 packet sizes, 20 bytes and 1000 bytes. 20 bytes because the small packets are usually the nastier to transport, and 1000 bytes because it's very similar to average packet size in the internet. We will try to increase as much as possible the capacity where it was possible. That was in UVA, but we had some issues of congestion in UVA that limited to us to 100 gig for the time being. We will continue at least up to 5 gig. And then the FPGA will collect all the data in its RAM and then export the data to a local disk in a local machine and translate these data in simple comma-separated values compatible to Excel and a lot of other analysis programs. I start to alert that one of the conclusions is that if you want to start testing these capabilities, probably you will generate a lot of information. And in those cases, a simple collector in one machine will easily run out of capabilities in terms of CPU and memory. And this is why a more robust backend platform like Kafka is suggested. As an example, the CESNET is doing similar testing, and they are using Kafka as a backend to really be able to ingest a larger amount of events per second. First result, no losses and no reordering, except one packet every 1 million packets. That means that our network are engineered and built, if you want, in a very efficient way. And the no packet losses means that we are able, not just in the core backbone, GÉANT itself, but also in our network, we still follow the principle that we shouldn't have any packet losses, which is a main difference with providers in general. No packet losses means also that the flows usually should not encounter any queuing in the routers themselves, and that is what we will see sooner. There has been just a small congestion in the UVA LAN, and this is why we were not increasing the capacity above 100 meg, because we didn't want to mix the local packet losses with any chance to understand the losses in the core backbones. So, good news. This is what we started 2 years ago in doing the measurement, just to provide a feeling using Grafana of what the measurements are. You have a flow of a certain speed that you measure with very high timing capabilities, and the timing varies between packets. There are quite a significant variation of the packets. There are no packet losses, no reordering anyway, and the inter-packet gap also varies, and maybe it can widely vary up to a few milliseconds in case of variations. So this is what we saw, just plotting the packets as they came in, and this is the int results, the int data plotted obviously in Grafana. So how to gather useful data from these plots? There are some trends that you can see. We decided to start with IP packet delay variation, the usual RFC. And this is, there is a series of plots that I will show you in the next slides that try to understand what is the effect of the network on the delay variation on the flow. This is one flow, and this is one flow of 10 meg, 20 bytes for each packet. And we measured each packet, and then we plotted the variation of its time in going from the source to the sink. As you can see, this is from Italy, FBK, 10 meg. The good news is that, as an example, the full width half maximum of this, which looks like a Gaussian, is not exactly a Gaussian, but it's very similar to a Gaussian, is very nice, 80 microseconds, which means that the variation of the delay of the time to go from Italy to the Czech Republic may vary, but not more than 80 microseconds in general for a single packet, which I personally consider a very, very good behavior of the network. We did the same for UVA at 1 meg, because it was simpler at 1 meg, 40 microseconds. I will comment on the difference between the countries in due time in the presentation. So it's even smaller in the variation than from than from Italy. The difference between this plot and this plot is that here we are using iPerf to generate the packets that are forwarded by the Tofino as a switch that tags the packet and forwards the switch and is received by the FPGA. Here, the packets are generated at 1 meg by the Tofino itself in hardware. So they are much more precise. We will see some plots later to describe these high precision of a source. This is from Greece, and from Greece, using iPerf2 to generate, and DPDK, a machine, a Linux box that emulates a switch, receives the packet, tags the packet with the int information and forwards the packet. As you can see, there is a not so clean behavior or the combination of the iPerf and DPDK that creates a dual pronged instead of a single Gaussian. But in any case, it's about 1 millisecond if you consider both prongs, which is still not too bad. This is the variation of a delay. So the delay may vary on average about 1 millisecond, but it can obviously vary more than 1 millisecond, and we have some long tails. To summarize, the measurements at 10 meg, 20 bytes, excellent delay variation on long path, considering that they are very long path in Europe. And the software packet generation increases jitter in at least 2 sites. While if you have a hardware packet generation, obviously it cleans a little bit what are your results of the jitter. Then I will move on to another speed capacity. We are moving now to the same speed, but larger packets. The setup is the same, and this is the different results. What you can see is that with larger packets, the full width of maximum essentially is reduced. So the delay variation is reduced. There are longer tails. So in any case, the tails are there, so you may expect some packets to have a huge variation. But in any case, also for the Tofino chip, we still have a long queue due to the network, but the variation as an average is smaller, 40 microseconds. These are microseconds, not milliseconds. And the same happens to Greece, in which we have, again, about 40 microseconds plus a long tail. So there are packets which are delayed up to few milliseconds, but the core of the packets of this flow still preserve the original flow time spectrum. So again, for large packets is good, but we start to have some long tails due to the forwarding of the packets to different domains. Higher speed, 100 meg, 20 bytes, very clean, 40 microseconds, even with iPerf as a generator. Very clean also from Netherlands, 100 meg, 20 bytes, 20 microseconds, because the packet generation in hardware actually simplifies and makes much more clear what are the effect of the generator and the effect of the network. This is what we are looking at. And the dual-pronged nature of the generation in DPDK comes much more clear at 100 meg, 20 bytes. And this is probably an effect due to the combination of iPerf and DPDK itself, and the management of small packets, of a large amount of small packets per second by the software platform. Say this, in any case, the variation is still very good, because from this picture, this is an overlap of the effect of the generation of the packets and also the transport of the network. And it's not so easy to decouple even if every care has been taken out to try to split the effect in different sizes. So if you increase capacity, jitter remains small, quite small in many cases. Small packets exhibit a worse behavior if you generate small packet in software, because the overhead of generating a lot of small packet in software is higher. If you generate 1,000 bytes packet, the number of packets per second, if you keep the total capacity the same, is much lower, but it's still adequate. This is what we discovered. Now we go to 100 meg, 1,000 bytes, and situation is even better, which is the normal, I would say, the normal situation of a flow in internet today. I would say that this is reduced to about 35 microseconds. So it's an additional reduction in the variation of the end-to-end delay, EP packet delay. Tofino is also quite very good. Note that the tail is smaller in percentage and it's much better also the peak itself. And the same happened, oops, sorry, didn't want to spoil anything. And the same happens also in Greeks because the overhead of a generator is lower. So both iPerf and the packet tagging by the DPDK kernel is much, much lower. And so it's capable of handling in the right way the generated packets. So even what I conclude from these slides, simple slides, I underscore the simple measurements, but even at higher capacity and packet size and large packet size, which is the average packet you can encounter in internet, the jitter of our networks are very, very good. So we can be proud of the network we created and engineered in our countries. But that's not what you can get out of a set of measurements we have done. We also wanted to look at interpacket distribution at the source and the sink. For ease of comparison, I don't have all the interpacket gap for all the flows. I choose to have the comparison of 10 meg, 20 byte in the 4 sites. And what it happens, if you look at interpacket gap distribution between the source in green and the destination in blue, then you can see that already at the source, which is in software, in this case, which is Italy, in iPerf 2, you start having 2 peaks, or even more than 2, at the source. So even the source is not correctly spaced in time. And when it reaches the destination, more than one peak appears, because probably packets are handled already in different way by the different radars and starting already at 2-pronged or 2 horns, if you want, at the source, then this behavior gets worse during the transport. But even if you see these horrible, what looks as an horrible behavior by the source and by the network, if you do the computation in microseconds, then the average value of interpacket gap at the source is 47, and is almost the same at destination. So has a flow, if you consider not a single packet, and you consider the whole quantity of the packets, the whole flow itself, the whole flow has a very, very similar interpacket gap at the source and at destination. And the difference between the mean values at the source and the destination of interpacket gap is almost 0. Slightly less than 0, I will discuss that later. And even the standard deviation is not too bad. If you go to 95th percentile of your packets, then you can see that the destination has a difference to the source. The destination has a larger amount, has a larger distance between in time between the packets because of the effect of the network. I hope you can see the very thin green line here of the Tofino chip in UVA. This is a very precise effect of a hardware generator of packets. After this presentation, we will have a short presentation about how to create a packet generator out of a switch based on a Tofino chip. This has been done. A simple P4 code has been done by Joseph Hill at UVA. And the Tofino itself is now generating packets enriched with int, with the correct information in timing. And the precision of that packet generator is outstanding. It's just a single line exactly at the interpacket gap that you are programmed on the chip. In fact, if you look at the measurements, in any case, the mean value at the source has no variation, essentially, or very small variation. And everything is centered in a single lambda. At the destination, is practically preserved. There are no difference between the mean value of the interpacket gap between the source and the destination. So again, our networks behave very, very well. We can be proud of what we have built, but proud in the sense that we can offer a tool and an infrastructure to our users that can effectively respect the quality of they deserve from their applications and their requirements. And the difference between source and destination in the interpacket gap average is 0, essentially. The standard deviation at the destination, yes, is slightly larger. I will show you how it's larger, and the 95% of the destination. I understand that this peak, just because of a scale, which is compatible with the others, is not reachable. So the next slide, which I now will show, is exactly identical, except that is now the scale is logarithmic. So what was a very, very small peak here now has been enlarged by the logarithmic scale. So keep in mind that they are not compatible because they are logarithmic, this scale. This is the effect of the network to a very precise packet generator. You create a lambda of packets with a very precise interpacket gap, and after 1,000 of kilometers, more or less, this is the difference in the interpacket gap of the flow itself. As you can see, it is distributed, yes, but the mean value stays the same, and the bulk of the packets are in this area, as the 95 percentiles clearly says. Sorry. The last site was Greece. And in Greece, you can see the usual effect of having a software generator. Even in this case, you have the generation of the packet in 2 peaks, essentially, which is the same format you have in Italy. Again, probably a mixture of iPerf and of iPerf and of DPDK. Note that how it's done. iPerf works on a separate box, usually, or on the same box here in Greece, and generates a packet at the application level. Then the packet is handled to a Tofino-based switch here, a wedge, and is handled to the kernel capabilities of a DPDK here, and is tagged with time. At that point in time, the packet receive a time of day timing and is forwarded. The same happens here, but the difference is that now time and generation are done in hardware. Note that even for Greece, the mean value of the interpacket gap is exactly the same, 0 difference. And the variation is definitely larger, as you can see, meaning that you have both an overlap of the effect of a generation of the packets that spreads the interpacket gap from the beginning, and at the same time the packet handling by the network. So packet generation in hardware, as this picture shows, provides very stable and excellent source interpacket gap, or quality or profile in time of the flow. And it's not too complex to create that as a program. You need P4 knowledge, of course, and you need the knowledge of the platform you're using, but it wasn't too complex. Software generators shows issues. So every generation in which you are using, if you want ping, trace, packet generators like iPerf, if you go down below 1 millisecond of precision, then probably you will start encountering these issues. And these issues are even higher at higher speed because the CPU will not keep up. So one of the lessons that we will summarize also at the end is that the software-based approach to monitoring at very precise timing has a limit, and you need to switch to silicon, real silicon, if you want to have precise measurements. The network creates some back-to-back packets. This blue peak here shows that after the network, what was already available as a source, because these almost zero interpacket gap says the two packets were much closer than expected, and they were even more close, quite more close than expected at the end, which means that something in the network brings some couple of packets or some trail of packets together. It was not a buffering due to congestion, was probably something due to the fact that you have different capacities and different handling of the packets in different switches. Just something to explore if you want. We have not enough hardware in the right places to explore this behavior. This was exactly what we wanted to understand. What should we expect from these type of measurements and from the handling of the network, that if is damaging a flow, or it can be considered as something to explore, should be explored with the right type of hardware. I think that on average, everything is very well. It's very good because the destination minus source averages in interpacket gap are zero. Note that these statistics is not few hundreds, it's few tens of thousands of packets. So the quality of the statistics, even if there are no errors here, is very, very high. So you can consider that these values have a very small zero due to statistical methods in computing those. Next step is I won't repeat everything. I was just changed from, it was 10 meg, 20 bytes. Now we are going to 100 meg, 1000 bytes to see if things change. And software changes gets better because the load of the software is lower. And so the starting interpacket gap, the green one here, is very, very close to the final interpacket gap. The generation of the interpacket gap at the beginning is very good, is almost a delta, very similar to a packet generation in hardware, even if you are in software, because packets are larger, essentially. So there is a much lower loss in, load on the machine to create it. But in the transport in the network, then you create small peaks here and there, just because the network creates some bunches of packets together or some back-to-back packets. And it's not a case that you have an average 80 microseconds interpacket gap And these two peaks here are distant 80 microseconds, one from each other, because it's a mirror effect. If you delay one packet, then the next one is much closer. So these are closely related to the fact that the packet are a trail of packets, and if you delay one from the packet beforehand, then the packet after it gets closer. So this is why these two peaks exhibit the same difference from the average interpacket gap. Good news is that even in this case, the network preserves very well the source and destination average of interpacket gap with a small standard deviation. Again, the Tofino generates packet at a very perfect quality, and this is what I will enlarge now. This is the resulting interpacket gap at the destination. Logarithmic, so keep in mind that this is logarithmic. The bulk of the packet stays very close to the origin interpacket gap. And as you can see, there is a difference here in the sense that, strangely enough, it looks that the average is reduced. In my opinion, this is a softer effect to the switching of the packets between the different speeds, but I have to investigate. So we didn't investigate that enough detail to be sure of the explanation I'm trying to provide you. Note that the difference is 1 microsecond. We are now discussing at a difference of 1 microsecond between the source and the destination. And that difference may be due to some packets that are abnormally delayed or abnormally increased in the switching from 1 gig or 10 gig to 40 gig to 100 gig and then back to different capacities. To investigate correctly that one, you should start inserting int-capable switches in the path itself, as an example in the exiting of a GÉANT network, so that you can understand inserting the packet, the timing. Then in the network itself is an intermediate node in which you can understand a timestamp, and then you have a timestamp at the end, and that will allow you to decouple the effects of the various networking of the three autonomous systems. The same happens even more pronounced in N2A. The packet generation is good, even if it is 3 now prong itself. The end is still good enough, but it has a peak of back-to-back packets. So there is something happening here in the network. In any case, due to this strange behavior at the beginning and at the end, if you want, there might be some packets that force the source minus destination average of interpacket gap to be smaller, of 4 microseconds. Again, these can be understood correctly only if we will add a node in the middle, and we are thinking about doing that to ensure that we understand this. We are not traveling in time. It is something, this is clearly an effect of the network itself. To summarize, packet generation is a very stable and excellent source of a flow with a very precise interpacket gap profile at different sizes. There is the hardware generation doesn't care too much about the packet size. It's just perfect at every size. Software generation, yeah, it's an issue at all sites. It's milder when you have large packets because the load of the CPU is smaller, but in any case, you do have some effect. The network creates some back-to-back packets to be investigated better than what I just tried to explain to you. And this effect of traveling in time backward is probably due to, again, the network effect in going from one capacity to a higher capacity and then back to another smaller capacity that can actually shrink by a few microseconds the interpacket delay as on average. This is my summary slide. Yeah, I think I'm well in time. Also to have few questions after this slide. So I'm trying to summarize what these measurements demonstrate and how can not just demonstrate about the network, but about the tool itself that can be used. The first conclusion is that according to these measurements, which are of limited size and unlimited duration, but we did some more extended measurements, even up to 4 hours, and the behavior stays the same. That the transport network we do have behaves very well in terms of modifying the timing profile of a user-generated flow from at least 4 countries in our NRENs. So this is a combined effect of 4 countries, and the results is, in my opinion, outstanding. It's excellent. It's not what I would have expected, even if I knew that the networks were well behaved anyway. And it can be synthesized in saying that few tenths of microseconds, this is the effect, the average effect of a network on a single packet, which is what you would expect on a standard switch. The vendors usually quote about 50 microseconds as the maximum delay that the switch should apply to a packet if there are no congestion in each of these line cards. No packet losses, and reordering reinforces the conclusion on the quality of the network. If you want to start really understanding what happens, what happens at the network switching behavior at the microsecond level, then it starts becoming more interesting and more complex. You have to decouple the software generator or the software handling of the packets to the hardware handling of the packets. And the hardware handling of the packets is clearly what should be there if you are interested. Note that apart from the generation in software of the packet, which has some issues that I show you, after the generation in software, everything goes in hardware. The initial tagging of timestamp in the initial switches is done in hardware, apart from the PDK, but in the other cases are Tofino and FPGA, and tagging is in hardware. And that tells us that apart from the initial generation in Italy and in Greece, all the rest being in hardware can be safely assumed to be a network effect of the order of tens of microseconds. So the plots I showed you about the NTUA to CESNET path are generated in hardware at the timestamps, recorded in hardware at the sync. So that path is really all in hardware in terms of timestamps, and the analysis, in my opinion, has a higher level of validity in terms of differences, even if there are no significant differences about the averages. I would say also that what you can read from these measurements is that we disguised ourselves as end users in our own networks, and we did all this testing as end users from a desk to another desk in different locations without any need of modifications of the transporting networks, which also tells us the quality of the networks. Of course, we added some filtering due to security measures and other things in our own end node and starting node, but we didn't ask our NOCs to modify. We just switched on these measurements, and maybe we told them, well, if we increase the speeds above 100 meg, we are not trying to create an IO service. We are just testing the network itself, so they were alerted. But that was the only reason, because of the measurements procedure, not because of that the packets would have been blocked by the network itself. This is also a consequence because we put the additional data between the UDP and the data part transported by the UDP packet, so that no one noticed that. Second slide of, and final slide of summary. Yes?
There was a comment from Yatish trying to mixing 8K packet at 10% fill rate with regular packets for the negative IPG test.
Okay. Sorry, I missed the what was the comment about 8K packets, but then sorry.
At 10% fill rate.
Yes.
Maybe you can read it directly on the chat, and that would be better.
Yeah, I will look at the chat.
Yeah. No, I think it's just a comment from Yatish.
Okay, so I will end this slide and then
yeah,
this
perfect.
is
No
the
problem.
final slide, and
Please
then
go.
we go to the comment. Okay, so packet handling in software works. This is the other point, is that DPDK, I don't want to say that DPDK is bad. Actually, these measurements shows that the use of DPDK is excellent, up to the level of a standard CPU that you have in a pizza box type of generator, even with a lot of care. What I expect from DPDK is a very, very good behavior up to a few gigabit, but not more. And you shouldn't use that that platform at higher speed with if you are not prepared to do very careful measurements in the hardware the platform has. But already measuring at 1 gig or lower speed provides you a very, very large amount of information. If you want to go above a gig, or if you want to have something which explores below microsecond behavior, because, for example, you want to have signaling at the control plane level, which are much faster than the millisecond, because you want to react much faster, then you have to use silicon. This is my personal conclusion, our personal conclusion. The combination of int and the P4 language is very good in the sense that it permits you to enter this with a little bit more easiness than the low-level programming, these capabilities of monitoring a network at the very precise timing. What I would again raise a flag on is that these measurements create a lot of data, creates a lot of packets, a lot of monitoring data that you have to analyze. We started using a specialized connector on one machine and then Grafana, and we discovered that both had limitation in the number of packets per second. And this is why, for example, CESNET is using a much stronger backend, which is Kafka, to digest the large amount of signaling packets that you will receive from the network as soon as you start looking at all these. Especially keep in mind that what we have done, easily tens of thousands of packets is for only one flow between two end user sites. If you have a full network and if you want to enable that, you have clearly to take a policy decision on what you want to look at and to have a much more robust backend to digest all the data and to analyze them. I have to say that these achievements has been done in the last 3 years, 3.5 years, also by the participation of people who now are working on different universities or industries. And I wanted to thank them because their contribution was essentially from many different countries, and obviously to Tim, Ivana, and Xavier, which are the task and work package leaders. So a sincere thank you that allow it to do these kind of things. The last slides are just some references for persons that are interested in these references. Thank you. I will now stop sharing and open the floor for questions, and I will start reading the question on stop sharing. Okay, here I am. And chart. Yes, I've read the comment from Yatish. Yes, that is a possibility. It is, in any case, interesting to understand why the time shrinks, if you want. I think it is an effect of few packets that are modified in time that has a long arm to change the average value. There are the second comment from Lars Bjorn is, are there measurements of commercial networks to compare to these results? Just now there is talks about during an NRN specified test, but because I think EPG many more than metrics. The commercials, in my opinion, and don't want to disclose any of these type of measurements because it's a very sensitive thing, especially if you try to do these on a DSL, then probably the quality of the network will not be very nice, and it can disclose the behavior of your network to competitors. So as far as I know, I don't know any measurements in a commercial environment of these kind of metrics, if you want.
Maybe I should clarify. I don't know if I'm going through.
Please, yes.
Yeah. It was more if this test setup has been hooked up with one end, for example, in a commercial network, just to verify it. So using the exact same hardware, because at least on the APM list, I think there was a talk about doing an NREN speed test and so on and so forth. But I think maybe interpacket gap and delays and jitter and so on, that's what separates the network, the NREN networks in the end from the commercial providers. Everybody can get now these days 500 megs down if they want to watch cat videos, but it doesn't really say anything about the capabilities of the network and the real interesting thing if you are filling up the buffer somewhere or having delays for large traffic. So it was more of an idea than to hook up maybe just 100 megabit or the 10 megabit test can be done from any connectivity at home at some other university that maybe has both a commercial uplink and an NREN uplink. So just an idea to emphasize the value of these IPG measurements.
No, thanks, Lars. It's a good idea, actually. And it might be a little bit more complex to take a wedge switch to my house and test it. But this is one of the reasons why we test with DPDK, to understand the behavior of the DPK, because those kind of that kind of platform can be much more easily transferred to other locations or installed in another location and do this kind of testing. And I agree that the reason why we decided to have interpacket gap and the usual delay is to have a measure that you can use to evaluate the behavior of your network in comparison to other, not just the raw speed. In my opinion, the raw speed is not enough. We just discussed also the importance of the end-to-end latency by itself, not increase too much of the latency. And the latency variation, for example, is very important in the LoRa environment, where you have musicians or real-time interaction between people in which fractions of milliseconds matter. And my idea of doing this kind of measurement is to understand how large that fraction of millisecond can be. And these are the first measurements that we had. And all the code and everything is available on the network, and we're here to comment and to meet.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thanks, Yatish. One of the things that I would really like to do, I don't know when exactly, but it will be also an intercontinental test in principle, even if we will test the transatlantic cable maybe and not anything else. But the idea of these kind of measurements is that you can extend these type of measurements to a lot of locations with a minimum effort. If you want silicon, you have to have silicon, no way out. But now FPGAs, as you know, and even DPDK boxes are becoming much cheaper and more affordable. So in principle, if we are interested in doing these kind of measurements because the application requires it, as an example, the application about control planes for telescopes, or even in the cloud environment in a data center, then it should be much easier to do these kind of measurements. Are there any other comments or questions?
Sorry, I didn't hear anyone else mention it. Maybe I missed it. There's also industry efforts in similar areas in inline OEM techniques. Are we considering interoperability and how those might work? I would imagine the vendors, the Ciscos and Junipers of the world, will use these IETF standardized approaches, whereas what you've described is in many ways more interesting and is something that could be used in RNE networks. How do you see these sitting alongside or working together?
Yeah, it's a good point, because that opens the door to the discussion of the competencies and expertise you need to run these kind of measurements, and what are doing the vendors. One of the main differences is that in this case, we were able to create our own application using the P4 language. We decided to use the in-standard to do that, but everything was done in-house, and that created a lot of knowledge to different people. Some of the people that I thanked actually left to the industry exactly because they have accumulated this kind of knowledge, and the industry was very interested. I think that I don't see an interest from providers to provide this kind of measurements, detailed measurements as a service, because unless it's for internal use, and in that case they have to implement that in their own switches, the providers, I don't think will be willing to do this kind of measurements. And the IOIM measurements is specifically, in my opinion, targeted at a closed environment, a provider that wants to test something in their own network with the hardware. And I think it's not, this is the difficult decisions we have to make. If we want to continue to understand the quality of networks at the order of 400 gig or 1 terabit, this is a simple tool that you can implement with some hardware that you have now with FPGA, and it can tell you much earlier a lot of information than waiting for the providers to implement that in their production routers. So my opinion is that I don't have much faith that that will come out soon.
Is there any other question for Mauro on this first talk? No, so maybe Mauro, would you like to start the second talk on behalf of
second talk,
Joseph?
it was supposed to be given by Joseph Hill from UVA, who He's the person that programmed this tool. Is very technical, so I will try to be not too much technical, but just showcase that as an interesting, an interesting example and of what I just described with you, the use of a Tofino as a generator package. I will share the screen. Just a second, I'm looking for the right window to share. There it is. Right. Okay. Here it is. I will share the screen, full screen. Go in full screen. Out. Even if I have two screens, it's always difficult to manage all the windows. Apologies for that. Okay. Okay, so you have the Tofino chip. The Tofino chip has been produced by Barefoot, and Barefoot at the same time is one of the vendors that created the P4 language. And actually, the idea of a Tofino chip is a chip that can be used to modify any sequence of bit in the packet. That means that it can create packets also with the sequence and the content that you would like to have. And the Tofino is done according to the slide I showed you before, or the packet specification switch, the PISA architecture, that has these create, match, and send packets. So you can, using P4, program externally a program and then upload the program to the switch itself that will run that at line speed. So the idea of these packet generators is that it should be able to generate packets with the framing and the headers you want up to 100 gig. That can be configured by the control plane of the switch itself. And the packet will be sent to the internet, if you want, in the egress of a data plane through one of the line cards of the switch itself. One of the parameters could be to send a different number of bytes in the packets, user bytes, if you want. This is a technical thing. When you want to use a Tofino chip, you have a library provided by Barefoot that already has a lot of functions, and you can use those functions from the library to reduce the programming effort and to also speed up the program itself. Because what you are doing now, you are working on bits at, let's say, 100 gigabit per second speed. So you have to be very careful in how you write the program, not to misuse the time you have to look, generate, and send a packet. These are some details that in these slides there are a lot of technical details. The slides have been uploaded. I will leave these slides for reference, and I will just do an overview of how that is done and the results also. Joseph did some nice measurements. So you have to add on 2 planes, because you have now a control plane in which you have to enable this functionality at the control plane to generate a packet. Then from the control plane, you have to write data to the buffer, configure the specific app in the switch that generates the packet. And you have to enable that because you want to enable that app in the control plane. This is also a nice way to understand the SDN implementation of these kind of things. You really differentiate between what you do at the control plane and what you do at the switching plane, which is the data plane. The data plane will implement what you have told the data plane to do. Details on the specific functions that you have to implement and enable. With some buffering, you have to keep in mind that, again, you have a limited buffering capabilities, limited amount of RAM in the switch itself. So it's like in the old times when you have limited central memory and limited storage to program in C. P4 is similar to C, but not exactly similar. Then, of course, you can decide again to have parameters on how to switch on this app and what the app should do. You can decide a one-timer that says send 1,000 packets. You can periodically repeat the packets. You can decide to trigger this event in case of a port down of packet recirculation. This is interesting, again, to explain what is the SDN in practice. You can use these switches because they clearly decouple the data plane from the control plane, and then you have more freedom to use on this switch to actually do what you are interested in and to decide yourself to generate what you want. Configuring things, and then you have to, at the programming level, use certain type of functions and specifications to enable these behaviors of the program itself. This is how you configure the application itself. I don't want to go into the details. One, because I'm not so familiar with all these comments, and Joseph will be the best one to discuss that. You can send him a mail or send me to me, and we will try to reply as fast as possible. He's in the United States now, and then you obviously you gather all the parameters and then you implement them. This is an example of P4. This is a snippet of a definition of something at the P4 level. The P4, like in C, you can work at the bit level. And that means that you have to be very careful in minimizing the number of bits you are using, but it gives you an extreme flexibility in doing things. Again, this is the initial header parsing that will decide what to do. And these are the results. I asked Joseph to add few slides on the results. The results is this program has been written, and now Joseph tested the quality of the results of the program in terms of sending and receiving packets from 2 switches, 2 Tofino-based switches that he has, and measure their capabilities. This scale is in nanosecond. It's not in microsecond, it's in nanosecond. So as you can see, the transmit capability of the switch varies of 1 nanosecond at maximum or half nanosecond between different packets. So the precision of the generated packet by the switch itself is on the nanosecond scale. This is measured because he had 2 Tofino switches, and he can, or you can just look back, and everything is done in hardware. So you emit a packet, and then you measure at the receiving port or switch, you tag it again, and you measure what is the difference. as you can see, if you have a network in between, due to many, many different things, because now we are at the nanosecond level. For example, if you patch two line cards with fibers which are few centimeters different, then it may actually impact your delay by increasing or decreasing it. But in any case, the network may still do something at the nanosecond level if you have a clean network inside your lab. So the conclusions from these testing is that the program works very well. It's capable of emitting packets at the nanosecond precision. And even if you have a network in between, but it's allow me to use clean and very simple network in between, and a hardware receiver at the other hand, the variation expected is minimal of the order of few nanoseconds. This is the analogous measurement that I've shown you in software, if you want. This is done in pure hardware between two switches. So these simple functions, simple application can configure interpacket gap. This is how the interpacket gap is transmitted. So if you transmit the interpacket gap, is it preserved in the transmit interface? Yes, it's preserved at the level of less than 1 nanosecond. And it is received with a precision of less than 2 nanosecond, with a maximum variation up to 3 or 4 nanosecond, which means that the quality of the hardware is very, very good now. And you can really go down to that level if it's needed, because the applications you have to use has these requirements. And these are the references that have been left. And I will stop here. I hope I was very fast because I didn't want to go into the technical and nitty-gritty details, but these slides are there, we are here. So if you want to replicate, you're much than welcome, and just contact us.
Thank you, Mauro. Is there any question for Mauro about this traffic generator? Well, time.
Or anything else, yes.
Time generator, something else. I think there is no question. So maybe Mauro, do you have a...
No, we are in perfect time. It's 4:30.
Cool.
So I just want to thank everyone for participating to this InfoShare. If you want to have more details or if you have any comments, please send us a mail and we will reply as soon as possible. Thanks a lot. And thanks to Xavier also for sharing.
No, it's not sharing. Thank you, Mauro.
Thanks, Xavier. Well done.
And thank you to others. I wish you a very nice day, and see you in another InfoShare. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.